What's up guys, welcome back to another video. In today's video we're going to be installing a Kinetix intake manifold for the 350Z or G35 on the yellow Z here. Before we jump into the install, I have to go get that thing. If you remember a few videos ago, I purchased a crashed 350Z and that thing came with a whole bunch of cool parts, this intake manifold being one of them. I've had my eye on this thing for quite a long time just because it looks really cool and it claims to add a good amount of power. And I figured since it came on the new car, why not yank it off that thing and put it on my car where it'll really get put to the test. So we're gonna run over to the other house where I have that thing stored and we'll yank that intake manifold off. Crashed Z here. This is what I'm taking this manifold off of. So let's see if this thing's worth it. We're gonna toss it on the yellow car and hopefully get some more power. Package secure. Install seems pretty straightforward, so we're going to start by getting this old intake manifold off. Now this definitely isn't my first time taking this intake manifold off, but if it's your first time, I'll walk you through. It is pretty straightforward. Step one is going to be removing the strut tower bar. That is just 4 14mm bolts, well 3 in my case, on each side. Once you get that off, the bar will just lift right out of the way, and then we can jump into the intake manifold itself. Alright, with the strut tower out of the way and a little bit more light here, the next thing that's got to come off is the intake itself. In my case I have an aftermarket one, so it's just going to be this clamp here and then the mass airflow sensor that plugs in right here. This is just one little plug, you pop it right off. If you had the factory airbox, there would be some mounting spots for it here you'd have to undo. Other than that, it comes out pretty easy. We'll get this guy out of the way and then turn our attention to the actual manifold. Alright, intake's out of the way. Now we can get this manifold off. Start by taking the lines off. If your car's factory, there will be a vacuum line here. You've got this vacuum line here that will just pull right off. The fuel rail bolts to the intake manifold here. It's these two bolts in the back, this one, and then this will just kind of slide out of the way. Don't undo these. That is part of your fuel rail. Don't mess with that. This guy, undo that, move that out of the way. You've got a line here. And there are 2 more lines underneath, kind of in the back there, that will access once we get this upper plenum off. Now it is just a bunch of 10mm bolts. Got one there, they lined the whole perimeter, and then we've got 6 in here. Okay, so I've got the upper intake manifold or plenum kind of lifted off, and here you can see line in the back that's kind of difficult to get to. It is right there, that little clamp, and it goes to the bottom of the throttle body. So we'll get some pliers back there, yank that guy off, and this upper plenum should be able to lift right off. Alright, so we got the upper half of the intake manifold or plenum off. Now we can get a better look at the lower half. Now this mounts to the car with all of these bolts here, and then there is one in the very front buried down there, and one more in the back that looks just like that on the back side back here. We also have that fuel rail that I mentioned. Again, it's just these 2, not those 2. And then one little bolt that holds this wiring harness in place. And you'll want to disconnect this breather line. This just goes to one of the valve covers. You can just slide it right off. You see I don't even have a hose clamp on there. And this lower plenum should lift right off. Side note though, there is quite a bit of oil in there. This thing smokes pretty good on cold starts, and I can definitely see why that is. We're gonna just ignore that. It's good, I swear. All right, the entire intake manifold is officially off. Now you can see what we're working with here. I'm gonna save this gasket. This thing's in good shape. And with everything kind of pushed out of the way, we are ready to slap the new one on. Okay, one thing to note, I got this secondhand off another car. If you were to buy it brand new, there would be a few things you have to transfer from the old one to the new one. The main thing being the throttle body. Again, mine's already on there, but I'll at least go over it just so you know what to do. Okay, but first, can we admire how good this thing looks? Okay, but the throttle body is just 4 Allens, and it just bolts right onto that. And this looks like it came with a new gasket, because it's got a cork gasket there and on the bottom, and that is not factory. But yeah, since this thing's ready to go, I'm going to toss it in the car, and I'll show you guys how to hook up the little lines and some of the hardware stuff. Okay, one thing I noticed right off the bat, there is this little bracket that holds this wire harness in place. It was interfering with the manifold, so I may need to either trim it or just get rid of it. It looks like it might work now that it's in place. You can see it's touching right up against that if that's lined up though, so that's probably not good. I think I can just chop this little bit off and it'll still function. On that topic, this was another one that bolted to the original intake manifold, and this now has no home, so we'll just get rid of that. This guy, you can see, hooks up right where it needs to be. This is the one that comes off that intake manifold. I'm guessing it'll go there. I'll probably have to trim that. That's kind of funky. No biggie. Quick little fix for the wiring. I trimmed that one. I just used tin snips. That's why it looks really ugly. Later down the road, I'll probably clean that up with a grinder so it's not sharp and dangerous. But out of the way, and the wire's still in the right spot. This one was the one that was over here. I'm actually going to move it to over here. This used to have a really big bracket that bolted to the front of the original intake manifold, and then bolted here and kind of held the wire in place. Threw that whole thing away. We're just going to use this little guy and zip tie the wiring harness right there. Should be good, and it'll look a whole lot cleaner. Looking at the fuel rail back here, it still lines up. We're only going to be using one because that's all this manifold has a provision for, but you can see it lines up just fine, so we'll toss a bolt in that. Fuel rail will be good. Okay, getting the bolts in for this thing is not as easy as it should be. Let me show you what I had to do to get these bolts in. Okay, so originally this came with Allen hardware for these, and I switched them out to 10 mils because A, I don't have all the Allens, and B, 10mm bolts are easier to use. But the ones in here have to be Allens because that's the only thing that will fit. And if we go back to the furthest one, the Allen key I had doesn't even fit in between these runners. I mean, it did, but it was really difficult. So a tip for that, set the Allen bolts in the manifold before you put the manifold on the car, because once it's in there, you cannot get your hands in there to get those bolts in the right little spot. So that's what I had to do first, and then secondly, I had to use a really long Allen on a wrench. Let me show you the tool I have. So I was using this really long Allen key on a 1/4-inch wrench, and it works fine in here, works fine in here. When you get back here, it doesn't turn. There's no room for this to turn, and I ended up just forcing it to turn, which is why this is like a little marred up, and there's some scarring in there. You can't really see it, thankfully. A little bit harder than it should be, but it's in, everything's tightened down. Now we move on to the next biggest issue of this install. Now again, if you bought this thing brand new, maybe it came with a provision for what I'm about to show you, because I didn't buy it brand new. I don't have anything to reference. Kind of just flying by the seat of my pants, and I did look at the car that I pulled this off of, and it had something that I may or may not kind of copy. Let me show you what I'm talking about. If you remember, I mentioned there were two coolant lines that ran to the back. I mistakenly said to the throttle body, but they ran to the back of the original intake manifold, right behind the throttle body. Those two coolant lines now have no place to go. This is one of them. This originally went about here, and then this is another one of them. Now, what the car I pulled this off of had was just a brass 90-degree fitting right here that connected both of these, so then it just ran in a loop. So I'm going to see if I can dig up a fitting and do that. Otherwise, I can cap this line, get rid of it entirely, cut it way down here, cap it right there, and call it a day. I could do the same at the one in the back. So we'll see, one way or another. Okay, this is one of those, it ain't stupid if it works. Really long bolt, this thing's about this long, and it's so big I had to thread it all the way in, then a hose clamp. This is not gonna leak, guarantee you. It does look just a little goofy though. Look at how cool that looks. One thing I did notice, there's no provision for this to bolt onto now, so there's nothing holding it in. I just tightened it really good there, and it's kind of wedged in here, so it doesn't have a lot of movement. I think it'll be okay, but eventually I may fab up a little bracket to like bolt it to this end or something, but for now it should be fine. I still have to put the strut tower back on, but I just wanted to admire how good that looks. All right, all that's left to do now, fire this thing up, make sure everything works the way it's supposed to. I'm not gonna do like a serious test drive just because it's like 10 o'clock at night, but I might just do a little putt around the block and make sure it's doing what it's supposed to do. The real test is gonna be in a few days when I'm at the track. I'll be back at Orange Show Speedway. I think it's gonna be a good comparison since I was just there less than a month ago. I should be able to see if this actually makes any difference. Because again, on their website, I'll put up a picture of their dyno sheet. It claims to make way more power, or at least enough to be noticeable. So we'll see if that's actually true or if that's just some crazy numbers they made up. Not sure if you could hear that little noise, but that was a vacuum leak. I forgot there was a vacuum port on the back of this thing. That was a provision for the evap canister and that whole system. I've removed that system. I made a whole video about it if you're interested, but so I've got to cap that line off. So let me get a little thing on there. We'll cap that off. I'll fire this thing back up and hopefully it's good. All right, here's a little 1, 2, 3 for you. All right, based off that quick little test drive, I don't think the car has a tremendous amount more power, but it was enough to be noticeable. Now, I wouldn't say it's noticeable through the entire power band. I would say the main spot I noticed it was like mid to mid-high RPMs. So 30, let's say 3 grand to maybe 5 grand. If you were just kind of there and you stabbed the throttle, the car definitely picked up a little bit faster. It felt like it had a bit more mid-range torque, we'll call it. So a little bit more responsive, a little bit more power in an important spot, because really that's kind of the RPM range you're going to use a lot in drifting, right? It's rare that I'm way down at 1500 or 2000 RPMs, and I'm not going to say it's rare, but I'm not always super high up on the red line. A lot of it's really in that meat between 3 grand and 5 grand. You're kind of just on and off throttle a lot. So to notice a power gain in that specific range, I think is really going to help. Now, it wasn't tremendous. The car didn't feel like way faster or anything, but a little bit more responsive. And I think that's the game we're playing with this thing while I still have a stock motor and no turbo or anything crazy like that, right? A bunch of little improvements here and there will make a big difference overall. But like I had mentioned earlier, the real test is going to be in a few days when we go down to Orange Show Speedway and I can actually get this thing on a track that I have driven in the past and have driven recently. And we'll really see if the run up to the bank is any different, because that's what I'm most interested in. Because if I started right at the start-stop cone where they wanted us to start, I wasn't really in the power band in 3rd gear. Just maybe 500 RPMs too low and the car didn't have the right amount of power. So I'm hoping with just a little bit more in just the right spot, hopefully this will make a noticeable difference. Maybe it won't, but we'll see in just a few days. I'll catch up with you guys when we're at the track. All right, so I know I said I was going to catch up with you guys at the track, and that was definitely my plan, but that Sunday ended up being a hurricane. Well, SoCal's version of a hurricane. We got a ton of rain. It was crazy. I actually still went to the track. I just ended up there about 4 hours late because I was driving through a hurricane. And then I was driving on the track in a hurricane. And it was a ton of fun. It was definitely a learning experience, and it was really cool to actually ride the bank and like feel like I had enough power to do it. I mean, I was like on the limiter in 3rd, which doesn't happen in a stock powered Z. So that was cool. I didn't really film any of it because it was just kind of chaos and there was so much water everywhere. Like literally when I pulled the carpet out of this thing a few days later, the carpet was soaking wet. The insulation under it soaking wet. The inside of my doors was soaking wet. I mean, like, there was multiple times that the car shut off because stuff got wet that shouldn't have got wet. It developed a misfire a few different times, and thankfully I would just turn it off, let it dry for about a half hour, come back, and it was fine. But it was just a total chaotic day, and it was a lot of fun. But I was just kind of enjoying that moment and also worrying about my car surviving, and thankfully it did. It was great, but you know, too much going on, and it was kind of a short day, so I was like, whatever, I'm gonna leave the cameras down and just go have fun. But here's some clips of that. that a buddy filmed. And yeah, it kind of made it hard to test this intake manifold with a side-by-side comparison, because I went from driving a pretty serious track in the dry to driving the same track in a hurricane, and it was just completely different. Like, there was no grip anywhere. It was like ice skating on the infield. There was a lake in the middle of it. Well, it seemed like a lake. I'm sure you saw in some of the videos, I was literally throwing water 8 feet in the air over my car. Chaos. Tons of fun. But that being said, it was really hard to notice any difference in the intake manifold. Other than the sound, it definitely sounded cool. And kind of like what I said on that test drive, the mid-range power was a little bit more. It was just that little bit extra that when you kind of just stab the throttle to get back into it, it felt like it just picked up a little bit faster. So there's something there. I'm still gonna go test it in the dry, but not in this video. So anyways, enough rambling. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Sorry it wasn't a legit side-by-side test of driving, but hey, I had a ton of fun. I proved that this thing works, and it definitely is an improvement. It's not huge, but it's an improvement. So anyways, drop your comments down below. Let me know what you think. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and of course, catch you in the next one.